I didn't go back for the applause. I went back because my mother finally said what she'd always meant, out loud, in a room full of people she'd spent her whole life trying to impress. She looked at me across the lobby of the Fairmont, past the white floral arrangements and the guests holding champagne, and said it clearly enough for the table beside us to hear. "Why would someone like you even show up to something like this?" Polite smiles flickered and died. My father studied the floor. My brother's new business partner, the one standing 2 feet to my left, went pale so fast I thought he might reach for a chair. He didn't look at my mother. He looked at me like he'd just understood something that changed the math of his entire afternoon. Then he said, voice tight, controlled, "You need to stop talking right now. You can't understand that moment without understanding what came before it. What was taken, what was built quietly in its place, and what happens when the two finally share the same room." I was 22 when my parents gave me their version of a lesson. It arrived at the kitchen table of our semi-detached in Oakville, Ontario, on a Tuesday evening in late August when the days were still long and I was still naive enough to believe that asking for help from the people who were supposed to give it was a reasonable thing to do. I'd been accepted to the accounting program at McMaster. Not a backup. My first choice. I'd applied for OSAP, filled out every form, calculated the gap between what the government would lend and what the program actually cost. The number I was short wasn't catastrophic, it was just real, so I printed everything, organized it into a folder the way I organized everything back then, like neatness might make the answer easier, and I sat down with my parents after dinner. My mother didn't open the folder. She pushed it back toward me with 2 fingers like it was something she didn't want to touch. "You're an adult now," she said. "This is what being an adult means." My father was watching a game in the other room. He came to the doorway when he heard her tone, not because he planned to intervene, but because he'd learned over the years to appear present without being useful. "Your mother's right," he said. "We can't just hand you things." I looked at the folder between us. The gap was $9,000. Not a car, not a vacation. A semester. 3 weeks later, my brother Marcus came home from university for a long weekend. He was studying business at Queen's, which my parents had decided was the obvious choice for him, the right investment, the future they could point to at dinner parties. He mentioned, almost in passing, that his laptop had finally given out. By Sunday, there was a new MacBook on the kitchen counter with a bow on it. "You need the right tools," my mother told him, smoothing the ribbon. "It's not an expense. It's an investment." I stood in the hallway and did the math. A laptop plus his tuition plus the car they'd helped him buy in first year. I wasn't angry in the way people expect. I was something quieter, more clarifying. I understood, finally, that this wasn't an accident of circumstance or a temporary shortage of funds. It was a preference. And I was not it. That September, I deferred my acceptance, picked up a full-time position at an accounting firm downtown as an administrative assistant, and started building a plan that didn't include asking them for anything ever again. I enrolled in CPA prerequisite courses online, one at a time, at night, after long days of filing and answering phones and watching senior accountants do work I knew I could do. I lived in a basement apartment in Hamilton with a roommate I found through Kijiji, and a grocery budget I tracked to the dollar. My mother called once that fall. She asked how I was doing in the tone people use when they don't actually want an answer. I told her I was fine. She said Marcus had gotten an internship at a Bay Street firm through a family connection my father had activated. "We're so proud of him," she said. A pause, then, "You really should have stayed in school." I hung up and went back to my textbook. What my parents never understood, what I couldn't have articulated then but learned slowly through years of hard and quiet work, is that rejection by the people who were supposed to believe in you first doesn't break you cleanly. It doesn't arrive like a single wound. It accumulates. It becomes the background noise of every room you walk into, that low, persistent frequency asking, "Are you sure you belong here?" The answer, eventually, was yes. But it took time to stop asking. I passed my CPA PEF on the first attempt. I was 27. I remember sitting in a Tim Hortons on King Street West after getting the result on my phone, holding a medium coffee I'd been nursing for 40 minutes because I was still the kind of person who tracked expenses by habit, and thinking, they didn't pay for a single hour of this. The firm I joined specialized in forensic accounting and financial compliance. It wasn't the path I'd originally imagined when I was sitting at that kitchen table with my folder of paperwork. But it suited something in me, The part that understood, viscerally, how financial decisions get used to communicate love, or the absence of it. I was good at finding what the numbers were really saying underneath what people claimed they meant. By my early 30s, I'd moved into a senior review role with a firm that contracted regularly with the Ontario Securities Commission. The work was methodical, largely invisible to anyone outside the industry, and quietly consequential. I evaluated financial disclosures, reviewed compliance documentation, flagged anomalies for regulatory follow-up. A single memo from my desk could delay a company's fundraising round indefinitely. It wasn't authority that announced itself. It was authority that waited. Marcus re-entered my life the way he always had, through my mother's updates rather than any direct communication. A tagged photo this time. Company launch event, funding announcement. A man standing beside him, arm around his shoulders, grinning with the specific confidence of someone who believes he's about to become important. The caption named him, Jordan Mercer. Something in my chest went still. Not emotional, professional. Because I knew that name. Not personally, officially. Mercer's prospectus had come across my team's review queue 6 weeks earlier. It was attached to a Series A raise for a tech-adjacent financial services startup. Strong metrics, competent structuring, almost clean disclosure, except for an inconsistency in how historical revenue had been categorized across 2 reporting periods. Not fraud, not yet, but the kind of pattern that required a second look before any regulatory sign-off could proceed. His file was still open. I pulled it again that evening. Same Jordan Mercer, same incorporated address in Toronto's financial district, same man about to become my brother's business partner. I sat with that for a while. Life has a way of building things that feel like coincidences until you look at them straight on and realize they're just outcomes. Inevitable in retrospect. The invitation arrived 10 days later. Embossed card. Marcus and Jordan were hosting a formal launch event for their new firm at the Fairmont Royal York. Cocktails, announcement, press. My parents' names were listed as family guests of honor near the bottom of the card, printed in italics, as if their presence were a credential. I hadn't been in the same room as my parents in 4 years. I hadn't spoken to Marcus in nearly 2. The last conversation we'd had ended when I declined to congratulate him on a promotion I'd heard about through my mother, instead of from him directly, and he'd said, voice carrying an edge of something that sounded like inherited contempt, "You've always had a problem with other people's success." I'd let that sit between us without answering. I was good at that. I RSVP'd yes, not for drama, because I was part of the compliance review chain connected to Jordan Mercer's registration filing. Professional ethics required disclosure of any relational conflict before any review decision was finalized. Attendance was relevant. Absence wasn't neutrality. It was a gap in the record. The Fairmont's lobby smelled like fresh flowers and money performing itself. I arrived in a dark blazer, no statement, no uniform, just the quiet certainty of someone who knew exactly why she was there. The reactions came anyway. My mother spotted me near the entrance, and her expression moved through surprise, recalibration, and irritation in about 2 seconds. "You actually came," she said, not warmly. Marcus appeared behind her, older, more polished, looking at me with the particular wariness of someone who expects a conversation they don't want to have. "You look well," he said, which meant he wasn't sure what to do with me. "So do you," I replied. My father hovered at the edge of the group, greeting someone he recognized from across the room, grateful, as always, for a reason to be looking elsewhere. Jordan Mercer found me within 10 minutes. He was working the room with practiced ease, shaking hands, laughing at the right moments. When he reached me, he extended his hand with the automatic warmth of someone who hadn't yet read the name tag. Then he read it. The handshake completed, his smile completed, but something behind his eyes did not. "Miss Carter," he said. "Mr. Mercer?" I replied. A breath. Then, "I wasn't aware you and Marcus were related." "Yes?" He absorbed that. I watched him process it in real time, the way people do when 2 separate and apparently unconnected parts of their life suddenly reveal themselves to be the same situation. His complexion went careful, controlled, but careful. "I see," he said and excused himself. My mother chose that moment to arrive at my elbow. She'd been watching. She always watched. She looked from Jordan's retreating back to me with the expression she reserved for things she didn't understand but had already decided were somehow my fault. "What did you say to him?" "Hello." Her eyes narrowed. And then, with the particular cruelty of someone who has never once questioned whether the people around her were watching, she raised her voice just enough for the small cluster of guests nearby to catch it. "Why would someone like you even show up to something like this?" The laughter that followed was uncomfortable. The kind people produce reflexively when they're not sure what else to do. My father appeared at the edge of my vision, glass frozen at his lips. Marcus turned slowly from a conversation across the room. And Jordan Mercer, who had heard it clearly, went white. Not because of the insult, because in that single sentence, my mother had made visible, publicly, a relational connection he desperately needed no one to notice. He understood what it meant. He understood what it might require me to disclose. He understood that his entire filing was now attached, by 2 degrees of separation and one very loud comment, to a potential conflict of interest he had not declared. He crossed the room in 8 strides. "You need to stop talking right now," he said to my mother, voice low and absolutely serious. She blinked. "Excuse me. I'm serious." He looked at me. "Can we speak privately?" My mother straightened. "Whatever you need to say, you can say here." Jordan turned to her with the kind of patience that isn't kindness. "With respect, Mrs. Carter, I'm not speaking to you." The silence that followed was the particular silence of a room where people are pretending not to listen. We moved to a private meeting room off the main hall, the kind hotels keep for exactly this variety of situation. Jordan closed the door. My mother, predictably, followed. Marcus came behind her, expression unreadable. My father drifted in last and sat near the door like he was considering his exit options. Jordan spoke first. "I had no idea you and Marcus were siblings." "I know." "If I had known," he stopped, restarted. "My filing is still under review." "Yes. And you're part of that review chain." I was. His head came up. "When Marcus sent the invitation, I recognized the company name. I flagged the relational conflict to my supervising partner the same day and formally recused from your file. Someone else is handling it." Jordan sat back slightly. The relief and the embarrassment arrived simultaneously on his face. "You already?" "Before I came tonight." "Yes." Marcus stared at me. "You knew about his filing?" "I can't discuss the specifics of any active review." My mother's voice cut in, sharp with something that wasn't quite anger yet, more like the early warning before it. "This is completely out of proportion. She works in an office. She processes paperwork." Jordan turned to her slowly. "She's a senior compliance analyst contracted to the OSC. A pause. "The paperwork she processes determines whether companies like mine are allowed to raise capital." My mother opened her mouth, closed it. My father set his drink down. Marcus looked at the table. "Ah," my mother said, the syllable stripped of all its earlier confidence. I reached into my bag. Not for drama. Because I had brought it deliberately, had decided on the drive over that if I was going to be in this room with these people, I was going to be in it completely. I placed a small folder on the table. My father recognized the document on top before anyone else did. I watched the blood leave his face in a slow, specific way, not shock but recognition. The particular pallor of a man who had spent years telling himself something wasn't what it was. "What is that?" my mother asked. "My OSAP file," I said. "Including the institutional record of a parental income adjustment submitted to McMaster in October of the year," I deferred. "The adjustment claimed a significant reduction in household support capacity." I paused. "Filed 3 weeks after the family purchased a vehicle registered in Marcus's name." Silence. "Dad," Marcus said quietly. My father's voice came out thin. I didn't understand what I was signing. "You signed it twice," I said. "Not angry, just accurate. There's an original and an amendment." My mother's composure cracked, not into guilt but into its usual substitutes, deflection and volume. "You are standing in the middle of your brother's event, trying to humiliate this family." "No," my voice was steady. "I'm standing in the middle of your brother's event because I was invited, because my professional ethics required me to be present and to disclose, and because I've been carrying documentation that explains my absence from this family for 7 years and I'm tired of carrying it alone." Jordan looked at the folder. "Is there any legal exposure here?" "Misrepresentation on a government financial aid form is a federal matter," I said. "Whether that exposure is pursued depends on factors outside this room." My mother made a sound. "I haven't filed anything," I continued. "I'm not here to trigger an investigation. I'm here to say once, in front of people who were present for all of it, that what happened was real, that it was documented, and that I am not the version of me they've been describing to other people for the last 7 years. Marcus exhaled slowly. He looked like a man whose floor had shifted under his feet without warning. They told me you just stopped trying, he said. That you weren't serious about school. I know. I believed them. I know that too. His jaw worked. Why didn't you say something? I looked at him for a moment before I answered. Because when I tried, they called it being dramatic. And eventually I stopped wasting energy on people who'd already decided what they were going to hear. My father spoke from near the door, voice barely above a murmur. I'm sorry. My mother turned on him. Don't you dare. I'm sorry, he said again, louder, and the words sat in the room like something that had been waiting years for the space to exist. Jordan stood quietly, having long since understood that this was not his conversation to manage. He looked at me with the expression of a man recalibrating. You recused yourself, he said, before tonight. Without being asked, that's my job. No, he said carefully. That was a choice. You could have... No, I said. I couldn't. That's not who I am. A long pause. Then, I understand that now. He picked up the folder and placed it gently back in front of me. This should stay with you. I nodded. My mother had gone very quiet, which in her case was more unsettling than volume. She sat with her arms folded, looking at the wall to the left of my face, which was how she had always managed things she couldn't argue her way around. She simply refused to look directly at them. Marcus asked if he could speak with me alone before I left. We stood in the corridor outside the meeting room while the event continued without us, muffled string music and careful conversation floating under the door. I spent years thinking you chose to disappear, he said. I know. That you didn't care about this family. I know. Those are different things, he said slowly. Leaving because you were pushed out and leaving because you didn't care. Yes, I said. They are. He looked at me for a long time. There was something in his face that was working its way towards something honest, something that hadn't had the room to grow in a house, where one version of events had always been the only version allowed. I don't know what to do with this, he admitted. You don't have to do anything tonight, I said. He nodded slowly. The firm Jordan's filing. Someone competent is reviewing it. That process has nothing to do with tonight. He exhaled. Okay. Then, I have a lot of questions. I know. I picked up my bag. You know how to reach me. The drive back to my apartment in Liberty Village took 40 minutes in light Friday traffic. I drove with the radio off, which is how I prefer to think. The city moved past in its familiar way. The Gardener, the lakeshore, the slow amber of streetlights on wet pavement. I had not gone back to wound anyone. I want to be precise about that, because people tend to hear I brought documentation and assume the point was damage. The point was never damage. The point was that I had spent 7 years being described as a failure, a quitter, someone who gave up, by people whose account of events had been missing a significant number of the actual events, and I was done being a story someone else told. The consequences that followed were not dramatic in the way stories tend to require. My parents didn't lose everything. No one went to prison. Life doesn't usually work in those clean, punishing arcs that feel satisfying for 3 minutes and then dissolve. What happened was smaller and more lasting. OSAP's audit department, which reviews flagged institutional records periodically as a matter of standard procedure, eventually reached the same documents through their own channels. My parents received a repayment notice, a significant one. My father paid it without argument. My mother hired a lawyer who ultimately advised her to do the same. Jordan Mercer's filing cleared review 8 weeks later, through the colleague who had taken over my file, on its own merits. The historical revenue categorization required a restatement addendum, which he provided. The firm launched. Marcus sent me a text the morning of the announcement. 2 words. Thank you. I replied with one. Okay. It was a beginning. My father called 3 months later from a number I didn't recognize. He had switched phones, which I suspect was less about privacy and more about giving himself the small courage of a fresh start. We met at a cafe in Mississauga, halfway between his house and mine, the kind of neutral territory you choose when you're not sure yet what the terrain actually is. He looked older. Not worse, just more honest somehow, as if some layer of performance had finally been given permission to fall away. I told myself I didn't fully understand the form, he said. that I was just following your mother's lead on the financial stuff." He wrapped both hands around his mug. "But I knew. I think I always knew. I didn't say I know this time. I let it sit." "You're allowed to be angry," he offered. "I was," I told him. "It became something else eventually." "What?" I considered. "Evidence. That I needed to build something that didn't depend on anyone else's approval to hold." He was quiet for a while. "Did you?" "Yes." He nodded, and I could see he was trying to decide whether he was allowed to feel proud of that, given the circumstances that made it necessary. I didn't resolve that for him. Some things people have to work out in the privacy of their own conscience. My mother and I have not spoken since the Fairmont. That may change. It may not. I've stopped treating the question as urgent. She is a person who will protect her version of events for as long as she is able to, and I have learned, slowly, that her inability to tell the truth about the past is not a debt I am required to collect on. Marcus and I have coffee occasionally, once a month or so, at a place in the Junction he likes. We don't talk about our parents often. We talk about work, his firm, my caseload, the particular tiredness of being in your 30s and realizing that adulthood is largely the ongoing management of things no one warned you about when you were young enough to do something about them. There is something new between us, not close yet, but honest. It turns out honesty is a better foundation than familiarity, and familiarity was really all we'd ever had. I keep the documents. Not as a weapon. I have no need for a weapon. I keep them because they are the accurate record of something that happened, and accurate records matter. I know that more than most. People sometimes ask if it was worth it. Going back, bringing the folder, saying it out loud after 7 years of carrying it in silence. The question assumes the point was to win something. I didn't go back to win. I went back because I had spent a long time building a version of myself that could stand in a room with the people who'd made her feel small and simply be accurate, not louder. Not angrier, just correct. They gave me independence as a punishment. I took it as instruction. What they never counted on, what I don't think they're capable of counting on, is that some people, given no other option, will build something so solid and so quietly theirs, that by the time you try to diminish it, you're the one who sounds small. I rebuilt independence as self-respect that doesn't ask permission. If this story sat with you, let it. Think about fairness. About the price of silence and the cost of staying in a narrative that was never meant to include you as someone who mattered. If you know someone who needed to hear this today, send it to them. And if you want more stories about accountability, about what it looks like to build a life on your own terms and then simply let the truth do its work, stay with us.